When I bought my house 2 years ago, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down. Quiet cul-de-sac, good schools, friendly neighbors, and the kind of suburban peace that made you forget about the chaos of city life. The Homeowners Association, HOA, was something I didn't think twice about. Their rules seemed reasonable at first glance. Mow your lawn regularly, keep your trash cans hidden, no excessive noise after 10 p.m. I could live with that. But what I didn't know then was that my HOA wasn't just strict, it was tyrannical. And before long, they would cross a line I never thought possible. It started small. A few months after I moved in, I received my first violation notice. Apparently, my mailbox wasn't painted the approved shade of white. I laughed at the absurdity, but complied anyway. Then came the notice about my front garden. The HOA claimed my tulips were too bright and clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. I remember standing there, letter in hand, staring at the flowers I'd planted myself, wondering how anyone could be offended by a few colorful blooms. Soon, I began noticing the same pattern repeated throughout the neighborhood. My next-door neighbor, an older man named Mr. Wilkins, got fined because his driveway had a small oil stain. Another family was written up for hanging wind chimes deemed too noisy. The HOA president, a woman named Linda Harris, ran the board like a dictator. Everyone feared her. She was in her mid-50s, always wore pastel suits, and had a smile so fake it could curdle milk. Her husband, Bob, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, spent his afternoons cruising the neighborhood in a golf cart, snapping pictures of supposed violations. By the time spring rolled around, I'd already racked up 3 violation letters and 2 fines, all for petty nonsense. I decided enough was enough. I attended my first HOA meeting determined to challenge them. But when I brought up the issues, Linda smiled sweetly and said, "We only want what's best for the community, Mr. Thompson. Rules are rules." The rest of the board nodded like bobbleheads. I realized then that the HOA wasn't a democracy. It was a cult with a constitution. I stopped trying to reason with them. I paid my dues, ignored the letters, and kept my property neat. That should have been enough. But apparently, I'd made myself a target. One Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought someone was doing construction nearby. But when I looked out my front window, my jaw dropped. There was a small excavator parked right in front of my property, and 3 men in orange vests were digging a deep trench along the edge of my front yard. Dirt flew, grass tore up, and my driveway access was half blocked. I ran outside, still in my pajamas. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" One of the workers, a tired-looking guy with a sunburned face, shrugged. "We got a work order from the HOA. Said we're putting in a drainage trench." "A drainage trench? Around my property? I didn't authorize this." He looked uncomfortable. "We just follow the orders we get, sir." I demanded to see the paperwork, but it just listed the HOA's name, not mine. I immediately called Linda. She picked up after the 3rd ring, sounding annoyed. "Mr. Thompson, I assume this is about the trench?" "You assume correctly. Why is there construction on my property?" She sighed dramatically. "We've had several complaints about water runoff from your yard affecting the neighboring properties. The board voted to install a drainage solution. It's for the good of the community." "There's no runoff problem," I shouted. "And even if there were, you can't just dig up someone's yard without permission." "Oh, but we can," she said smugly. "It's in the community maintenance clause you agreed to when you bought your home. Perhaps you should reread your contract." And with that, she hung up. I was livid. I walked back out to the workers, told them to stop immediately, and threatened to call the police. They hesitated but eventually packed up their tools, saying they'd check with the HOA. My yard looked like a war zone. A jagged, muddy trench ran along the edge of my property, like a scar. That night, I pored over my HOA contract line by line. And while there were clauses about maintenance, nothing, absolutely nothing, gave them the right to alter private property without the owner's consent. That's when I decided to fight back. I had a home security system, 8 cameras covering every angle of my property. It was mostly for peace of mind, but now it became my weapon. The next few days, I noticed strange things. Someone had walked through my backyard at night. Tools had been moved. My garbage bins mysteriously disappeared. Then one morning, I woke up to find the trench deeper. Someone had come back in the night and continued digging. I checked my cameras. Sure enough, at 1:47 a.m., a white golf cart rolled up. Out stepped Bob Harris, holding a shovel. He was joined by two other HOA board members, both in dark hoodies. They spent nearly an hour digging before leaving. The footage was crystal clear. I couldn't believe it. The HOA had literally trespassed onto my property and vandalized it. I called the police immediately. When the officer arrived, I showed him the footage. He watched silently, then let out a low whistle. "Well, that's trespassing, all right," he said, "and possibly destruction of property." He filed a report and said they'd contact the HOA. I thought that would be the end of it. But oh no, Linda and Bob weren't done. The next day, I found a letter taped to my door. Notice of non-compliance, it read. The HOA claimed I'd interfered with authorized community maintenance and owed a $5,000 fine. They threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 10 days. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a power trip. It was personal. Linda and Bob were trying to make an example out of me, scare me into submission. They underestimated one thing. I'm not easily scared. I contacted a lawyer named Sarah Grant, who specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing the footage and documents, she looked at me and said, "They've got no legal ground to stand on. We can sue them for trespassing, property damage, and harassment." That was music to my ears. Sarah advised me to stay calm, collect evidence, and let her handle communication. But I couldn't resist giving Linda a little taste of what was coming. I printed a still image from my security footage, the one showing Bob mid-dig, shovel in hand, and taped it to my front door. Underneath, I wrote in red, "Smile for the camera." By the following morning, the entire neighborhood had seen it. Word spread fast. Neighbors started whispering. Some even came by to ask what happened. I told them the truth, that the HOA had trespassed and vandalized my yard. To my surprise, several of them admitted they'd had similar issues, but were too afraid to speak up. That fear started to fade once they realized someone was standing up to the board. 2 days later, I got another call, this time from Bob. His voice was full of false charm. "Hey there, Mr. Thompson. Maybe we can settle this without lawyers. You know how misunderstandings happen." I cut him off. "Save it, Bob. I have you on camera. The police report's been filed, and my attorney's already preparing a case." He stammered something about community harmony before hanging up. Less than an hour later, Linda sent a mass email to the neighborhood accusing me of spreading misinformation and harassing board members. But by then, no one was buying it. The following week, things escalated again. One morning, I discovered my car had been keyed. Deep, deliberate scratches down both sides. My security footage? It showed Bob again, sneaking around at 3 a.m., flashlight in hand. The footage was damning. I turned it over to the police, who added vandalism to the charges. Linda must have realized the walls were closing in because she called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss recent events. I went, with Sarah by my side. The room was packed. Almost the entire neighborhood showed up, curious about the drama. Linda stood at the front, trying to maintain her composure. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "we understand you're upset, but your accusations against this board are unfounded." Sarah interrupted her smoothly. "Unfounded? You mean the video footage of your husband digging on private property? Or the one showing him damaging my client's vehicle?" The crowd murmured. Linda's face went pale. "We will be filing civil and criminal charges," Sarah continued. "And we'll also be submitting a request for a full audit of the HOA's finances and actions for the last 5 years." That last part hit hard. Several neighbors gasped. One man shouted, "Yeah, where's all our money going, Linda?" Another yelled, "We've had the same broken streetlights for months, but you're digging trenches?" The meeting dissolved into chaos. Linda tried to shout over the noise, but the damage was done. The once feared HOA board was crumbling. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The police launched an investigation. Bob was arrested for trespassing and property damage. Linda resigned under pressure, claiming health reasons. The rest of the board disbanded soon after. A temporary committee of homeowners, actual residents, not power-hungry tyrants, was formed to manage things fairly. Meanwhile, my lawsuit moved forward. The HOA's insurance ended up paying for the damages, not just to my yard and car, but also for emotional distress and legal fees. When the dust settled, I received a settlement of $85,000. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real win was freedom. The neighborhood finally breathed again. People started talking to each other instead of spying through blinds. Rules were rewritten to prevent abuse of power. And that ugly trench? I filled it myself, planted new grass, and built a small flower bed where it once was bright red tulips, the same kind the HOA once said were too colorful. Months later, I installed a new mailbox, painted black this time, just because I could. My neighbors laughed when they saw it. We had a barbecue to celebrate the new HOA elections, and for the first time since moving there, it felt like a real community. Then, one evening, as the sun set, and I was cleaning up after the cookout, I noticed a car parked across the street, a beige sedan I didn't recognize. The window rolled down, and for a brief moment, I saw Linda sitting inside, watching. Our eyes met. She didn't look angry, just defeated. A second later, she drove off. I never saw her again. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how far it all went. Over some flowers, a paint color, and a petty need for control. But in the end, justice won. And as I look out over my peaceful yard, no trenches, no fines, no fake smiles, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't just about protecting your property. It's about reminding people that power without accountability is just corruption with better station. When I moved into Maplewood Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect neighborhood. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved when you drove by. It felt like a dream. After years of renting cramped apartments, I finally had a little piece of peace. The realtor mentioned the homeowners association during the sale, but I brushed it off. They just keep things orderly, she'd said with a bright smile. Nothing to worry about. At first, that seemed true. The HOA sent out cheerful newsletters about community picnics, lawn care tips, and reminders to keep mailboxes uniform. It all felt normal until the complaints started. The first one came a month after I moved in, a letter tucked into my mailbox saying my fence was non-compliant. Apparently, the shade of brown wasn't the approved tone. I laughed it off and repainted it. Then another came, this time about my outdoor lights being too bright. And another about my recycling bin being visible from the street. It was annoying, but I figured it would blow over. I was new. Maybe they were just being particular. But things started getting strange when I attended my first HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a low, brick building at the end of the cul-de-sac. About 20 homeowners sat in folding chairs, sipping coffee, while the board members sat at a long table in front. At the center was Marjorie Klein, the HOA president. She was in her 60s, hair perfectly permed, pearls around her neck, and an expression that could freeze water. To her right was Frank, the vice president, a thick-shouldered man who rarely spoke but stared at everyone like he was memorizing their faces. Marjorie welcomed everyone in a voice that sounded both sweet and condescending. The meeting seemed routine at first. Budgets, landscaping plans, and the upcoming spring beautification contest. But then she mentioned a new community initiative, something about property borders and runoff control. Some of our lots, she said, her eyes scanning the room, have begun to show minor erosion at the edges. To protect our property values, the board has decided to take proactive measures, installing drainage trenches along select properties. My stomach sank. Which properties? I asked. Marjorie smiled tightly. Yours for one, Mr. Weston. We'll begin next week. Wait, what? I never agreed to that. It's part of the collective property management clause in your HOA agreement, she said. All improvements benefit the community. You'll thank us later. I wanted to argue, but all eyes were on me. Some sympathetic, others wary. Marjorie moved on like I hadn't spoken. I walked out of that meeting with a bad feeling I couldn't shake. The next Tuesday, I woke up to the rumble of machinery. When I opened the blinds, my worst fear came true. A team of workers in orange vests was digging along the perimeter of my front yard, carving a trench so deep I couldn't see the bottom. Piles of dirt covered and my mailbox leaned sideways like it had been struck. I ran outside. Hey, who told you to dig here? HOA orders, one of them replied. You're on private property. I snapped. He shrugged. Talk to the board. I did. I called Marjorie immediately. "Oh, Mr. Weston," she said, her tone syrupy. "Please calm down. The work is temporary. It'll improve drainage and reduce flooding risks for everyone." "There's no flooding problem," I said. "You're destroying my lawn." Her voice hardened. "Refusing HOA maintenance could lead to fines. I'd hate to see that happen so soon after you've joined our community." The call ended. I stood in my yard, fists clenched, as the excavator kept tearing through the soil. That night, I went out with a flashlight to inspect the damage. The trench wrapped completely around my property, a jagged moat about 3 feet wide and maybe 4 deep. It was unsettling, standing there in the dark, the air damp and cold. But something else caught my attention. Down in the trench, near the corner by the streetlight, something gleamed. I crouched and looked closer. A piece of metal, half buried in the dirt. I brushed the soil away and realized it wasn't just metal. It was a rusted lockbox. I pried it out, heart thumping. It was heavy, sealed shut, and smelled faintly of iron and mold. I took it inside, cleaned it off, and eventually managed to force it open with a screwdriver. Inside were old photographs, dozens of them. They were all of the same place, my house. But in each one, something was slightly different. Some showed different paint colors, others a different front door. A few showed a completely different family, parents with 2 kids, smiling in front of the porch. And the last few photos were darker, literally, taken at night, from a distance. In one, the family was gone. In another, the house was empty, windows boarded up. The final photo made my blood run cold. It showed a deep trench around the property, just like the one outside now. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the previous owner, whose number I found in the property records. A woman named Ann Larkin answered. When I told her who I was, her tone changed immediately. "You bought that house?" she whispered. "Yes. I found something strange during construction. Don't go near the trench," she said sharply. "Why?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, they said it was for drainage, too. But after they dug it, things changed. My husband started hearing noises at night, like whispering under the ground. We thought it was animals, but then she stopped herself. "We moved out after the dog disappeared. Just get out while you can." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, heart hammering. Over the next few nights, things got worse. It started with noises, faint at first, then unmistakable. Scraping sounds. Thudding. Like someone was digging again. But when I checked the cameras, there was nothing there. Then, one morning, I found fresh dirt piled beside the trench, like it had been disturbed. I replayed the security footage from the night before, and around 2:37 a.m., I saw it. A figure. It looked like a man, but his movements were jerky, unnatural. He crawled along the trench, occasionally stopping to press his hand into the soil. His face was obscured by shadows. Then another figure appeared, shorter, thinner, following behind. I couldn't tell who they were, but they both wore orange vests like the workers from before. I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the footage. They said it was probably vandalism or a prank, but they'd keep an eye out. When they left, I noticed Marjorie standing across the street, watching. She smiled. 2 days later, a new letter appeared in my mailbox. "Dear Mr. Weston, the HOA has noted your interference with ongoing property improvements. For safety reasons, the trench must remain undisturbed. Any attempt to fill or alter it will result in fines and potential legal action. Sincerely, the Maplewood Estates HOA." There was something off about the paper. It wasn't printed on normal letterhead. It was old, yellowed, wrinkled, and smelled faintly of damp soil. I checked the mailbox again. The flag was still down. It hadn't been delivered by mail. Someone had put it there by hand. That night, the noises came back. Louder this time. I stayed awake with the lights on, watching the cameras. Around 1:30 a.m., I saw movement again, but not outside. Inside. One of the basement cameras flickered on. The motion sensor had triggered. I switched to the feed and saw something that made my stomach drop. A section of the basement floor, the concrete itself, was cracked open. Dirt was spilling in. And in that dirt, a hand was pushing through. I ran downstairs, but by the time I got there, the floor was normal. No cracks. No dirt. Just silence. I checked again in the morning. Nothing. Maybe I was losing it. But then I got a knock at the door. It was Frank, the HOA vice president. He stood on my porch, expression blank. "Morning," he said flatly. "Just checking in about the trench." "What about it?" "Marjorie wanted to remind you. Don't fill it. It's for your own safety." "My safety?" I asked. "From what?" He looked past me, into the house, eyes unfocused. "Sometimes the ground here moves. Things underneath. You don't want them to come up." I froze. "What are you talking about?" But he just turned and walked away. That night, I packed my bags. I didn't know what was happening, but I wanted out. I planned to leave at sunrise. But before I could sleep, my security alert went off again. Motion. Backyard. I opened the feed. There were dozens of people out there. Men and women, all in orange vests, standing silently around the trench. At the center stood Marjorie. She was holding a shovel. They began digging again, deeper this time. The noise was deafening through the speakers. Then Marjorie looked up, directly into the camera, and smiled. I ran outside with a flashlight, shouting for them to stop. But when I got there, the yard was empty. No people. No footprints. Just the trench, now twice as deep. And at the bottom, barely visible under the dirt, was something pale. I leaned closer. It was a hand. The next morning, the trench was filled. Perfectly level. As if nothing had ever been there. I called the police again, told them what I'd seen. They searched the area but found nothing. The soil was fresh, but no sign of remains. When I showed them the footage, the video was gone. Corrupted. Every camera angle from that night was blank. They left, telling me there was nothing more they could do. An hour later, a new HOA letter appeared on my porch. "We appreciate your cooperation. The community improvement project is complete. Please refrain from further inquiries. Enjoy your home." No signature this time. Just a small smear of dirt at the bottom. I moved out 2 weeks later. Sold the house at a loss to a young couple who seemed excited about the place. I warned them about the HOA, of course, but they laughed it off like I once did. I drove away that afternoon and didn't look back. But last month, out of curiosity, I checked the Maplewood Estates website. They'd posted community photos from their annual beautification day. And in the background of one of the photos, behind the smiling faces and trimmed hedges, I saw my old house. The trench was back. And standing at its edge, almost invisible in the shadows, was Marjorie, holding that same shovel. When I first moved into the neighborhood of Cedar Ridge Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect place to settle down. The streets were lined with oak trees, the lawns were always green, and the houses all looked like they belonged in a glossy magazine. It was the kind of place that promised peace, where neighbors smiled, kids played in sprinklers, and people waved as you drove by. The realtor told me the Homeowners Association, or HOA, kept everything orderly and beautiful. "They just make sure the community looks its best," she'd said. I didn't think twice about it then. If only I had known what I was getting into. At first, everything was fine. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, and I liked the quiet routine of my new life. But it didn't take long for the HOA to show its true colors. About a month after I moved in, I received my first violation letter. It said my trash can was visible from the street for over 30 minutes after pickup. The fine? $50. I shrugged it off. Rules were rules, I supposed. But then came another letter, this time about the color of my shutters being too dark for the community aesthetic. And then another one, about my grass height being a half-inch too long. It became clear the HOA wasn't just about maintaining appearances, it was about control. The HOA president, Daniel Crow, was a man who thrived on that control. He was in his mid-40s, tall, with slicked-back hair and a permanent smirk. His wife, Martha, was the HOA secretary, and if Daniel was the mind behind the board, Martha was the enforcer. She walked around the neighborhood every morning with a clipboard, inspecting every house like a soldier on patrol. People said she once fined a family because their Christmas lights were up a day past the deadline. I tried to stay under their radar, but that didn't last long. One afternoon, I was planting new bushes near the edge of my yard when Daniel stopped by in his silver SUV. He rolled down his window, sunglasses on, smile sharp. "Afternoon, Mr. Carson," he said. "I see you're doing some landscaping." "Yeah," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Just planting a few shrubs. Make sure they're within the approved species list," he said. "We don't want any invasive plants in Cedar Ridge." They're boxwoods, I said. Pretty standard. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me, then drove off. I should have known then he was watching me. A week later, I got another letter. Unauthorized landscaping, it said. Another fine. I started keeping every notice, every email, and every conversation documented. I had a feeling I'd need it someday. Then one morning, everything changed. It was a Friday in late spring. I woke up to the rumble of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was road work, maybe a utility company. But when I stepped outside, I froze. There was a backhoe parked in front of my yard, and 3 men in hard hats were digging a deep trench along my property line. The trench cut straight through my grass, leaving piles of dirt like open wounds across my lawn. I ran over. Hey, what do you think you're doing? One of the workers looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. We got orders from the HOA, sir.
Drainage trench installation.
What? I didn't authorize any construction. He shrugged. Talk to the HOA. We're just following the work order. I called Daniel immediately. He answered after a few rings, sounding cheerful. Mr. Carson, how are you this fine morning? You know damn well how I am, I snapped. There's a trench being dug across my property. Yes, that's right, he said, completely calm. It's part of the new community drainage improvement project. You'll thank us come storm season. You can't just do this without permission, I said. It's all within the HOA's rights, he replied smoothly. Section 14, subsection C of the Community Charter gives the board authority to make improvements that benefit the neighborhood. That doesn't mean you can dig up someone's yard. Well, he said, his tone turning icy, if you'd attended last month's meeting, you'd know this was discussed and approved. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. But I wasn't going to take this lying down. I had a full security system, cameras around the perimeter of my home, motion sensors, the works. That night, after the workers left, I reviewed the footage. And something immediately caught my attention. At around 9:30 p.m., long after the construction crew had gone, my driveway camera recorded movement. 3 people, dressed in dark clothes, standing near the trench. They weren't workers. They weren't neighbors either. I zoomed in. The footage was grainy, but I could make out faces. Daniel, his wife, Martha, and a third man, the HOA's treasurer, Kurt Allen. They were holding shovels. For the next half hour, the footage showed them digging, deeper, wider, and then tossing something wrapped in black plastic into the trench before covering it with dirt. When they were done, they stood in silence for a moment, looking around, and then walked off. I replayed it 3 times, heart pounding harder each time. What the hell had they buried in my yard? I called the police first thing the next morning. 2 officers came out, and I showed them the footage. They exchanged uneasy looks. This is definitely trespassing, one of them said. And possibly something more. They took statements and said they'd contact the HOA. But I noticed how their tone changed when I mentioned Daniel's name. Daniel Crow, one officer asked. He's on the county planning board, right? My stomach dropped. Of course he was. The officers said they'd look into it, but I could tell from their expressions that nothing would happen soon. So I decided to dig myself. That evening, after sunset, I grabbed a shovel and a flashlight and went to the trench. The soil was still soft. I started digging in the exact spot where the footage showed them stopping. About 2 feet down, I hit something solid. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. A plastic garbage bag. My hands trembled as I pulled it free and opened it. Inside were old documents, binders, and USB drives, all stamped with the HOA's logo. I flipped through papers, and what I saw made my blood run cold. They weren't just HOA records. They were financial statements showing that Daniel and his board had been embezzling funds for years. Maintenance projects, landscaping contracts, even neighborhood improvements, all fake invoices funneled into personal accounts. They'd buried the evidence. Literally. I took photos, bagged everything, and stored it in my garage. Then I backed up the security footage to multiple drives. If the police wouldn't act, I'd make sure someone would. The next day, I confronted Daniel. He was out walking his dog when I approached. Morning, I said coldly. He smiled that same smug smile. Mr. Carson, I hope you're enjoying our new drainage system. I know what you did, I said quietly. And I have it on video. His smile faltered for just a second, then returned. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. You, your wife, and Kurt, burying those documents. I dug them up. He stared at me for a long moment. Then his tone changed. You're making a serious accusation, he said. You should be careful. People don't take kindly to slander. I'm not the one who should be careful, I said. The cops will see the footage soon enough. I turned and walked away before he could respond. That night, my security cameras caught something else. Two men, both wearing black hoodies, sneaking into my yard around midnight. They tried to break into my garage, but ran off when the motion lights came on. I called the police again. When the officers arrived, they found bolt cutters in the grass and muddy footprints leading toward Daniel's house. But still, no arrests. I knew then that I needed to go bigger. I emailed copies of the footage and the financial documents to the local news station. Within 24 hours, they called me back. The story hit the airwaves the next evening. Cedar Ridge HOA accused of embezzlement and trespassing. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors flooded my doorstep, some angry, others shocked. Turns out, Daniel and his board had been pocketing tens of thousands of dollars from inflated community fees for years. People had suspected it, but no one had proof until now. Daniel tried to deny everything, claiming the footage was edited and the documents were stolen. But the evidence was too strong. Investigators raided his house, and within days, the entire HOA board was under investigation. The police finally came to search the trench area, officially this time. They unearthed more buried boxes filled with fake contracts, ledgers, and cash envelopes. It was all there. A month later, the HOA was dissolved. Daniel and Martha were arrested on multiple charges: fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property. Kurt turned on them, cutting a deal for leniency in exchange for testimony. The neighborhood was chaotic for a while: lawsuits, news vans, gossip. But once the dust settled, something incredible happened. Without the HOA breathing down everyone's necks, people relaxed.
Kids played outside again.
Neighbors started talking to each other instead of reporting one another. It felt like a community for the first time. As for me, I filled the trench, reseeded the grass, and installed a new fence. But I left one of my cameras pointed right at that spot, just in case. One evening, as I was watching the sunset from my porch, my neighbor Carol walked over. You know, she said, you did us all a favor. Nobody ever stood up to Daniel before. I smiled. I just wanted to protect my property. Maybe so, she said. But you protected a lot more than that. After she left, I looked out over my lawn. It was perfect again, green, smooth, peaceful. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of shovels, the echo of what they tried to bury, and what I uncovered instead. When I bought my house on Willow Creek Lane, I thought I'd finally escaped chaos. After years of noisy apartments and cranky landlords, this was supposed to be peace, a quiet suburban home with a big yard and friendly neighbors. The community looked picture perfect. White fences, trimmed lawns, American flags fluttering on porches. The realtor mentioned an HOA, but I didn't pay much attention. They just keep the neighborhood nice, she'd said with a bright smile. At first, it all seemed harmless. I met the neighbors, joined a few barbecues, and even attended an HOA meeting. That's where I met Gerald Matthews, the HOA president. A man in his 50s with perfectly parted hair, expensive glasses, and the kind of grin that never reached his eyes. His wife, Linda, served as the treasurer, and his son, Kyle, handled maintenance inspections. Together, they treated the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. The first warning sign came a few weeks later, a notice taped to my mailbox. Violation: lawn overgrowth. My grass was maybe half an inch taller than my neighbor's. I thought it was a mistake, but then came another notice. Non-compliant mailbox color. Then another. Unauthorized tree trimming. It was ridiculous, but I paid the fines just to avoid trouble. Still, something about Gerald's smug expression every time I saw him made my skin crawl. I should have known that was just the beginning. It started on a Saturday morning in May. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. When I looked outside, I saw a yellow excavator parked right in front of my house. Men in orange vests were digging along the edge of my yard. I ran outside, barefoot and half-dressed. "What the hell are you doing?" One of the workers looked up. "Drainage trench," he said. "HOA orders." "On my property? Without my permission?" He shrugged. They said it was for community maintenance. I called Gerald immediately. He answered with his usual arrogance. Good morning, Mr. Hall. Lovely day, isn't it? Why are people digging up my yard? I demanded. It's part of the neighborhood water management project, he said smoothly. Your property is on a slope, and we've had complaints of runoff into the street. We're just fixing that. Runoff. That's a lie. My yard drains fine. Well, he said, tone shifting, you agreed to comply with all HOA maintenance under the community charter. Section 7, subsection 4. That doesn't mean you can destroy my property. He chuckled softly. You'll thank us later. Goodbye, Mr. Hall. And he hung up. By the end of the day, there was a deep trench surrounding my entire front yard, 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and filled with mud. It looked like a moat. I was furious. My lawn was ruined, my sprinkler lines tore apart, and I couldn't even drive into my driveway without crossing wooden planks the workers had left behind. I decided to review my security footage just in case. I had cameras on every corner of my property. What I found made my blood run cold. At around midnight, long after the workers had left, the same excavator returned. Someone had driven it back onto my lawn and kept digging. I zoomed in on the footage and froze. It wasn't the workers. It was Gerald, wearing a reflective vest, and his son Kyle. They dug for almost an hour. Then Gerald pulled something from the trunk of his SUV, a large, dark plastic bag. Together, they tossed it into the trench and covered it with dirt. I couldn't tell what was in the bag, but I could see its shape, long, heavy, and unmistakably human-sized. The next morning, I called the police. Officer Ramirez arrived within the hour. I showed him the footage. He watched silently, frowning. That's definitely unusual, he said. You sure that's them? Yes, I said. That's Gerald and his son. He sighed. We'll have to get a warrant to dig it up. But I'll contact the HOA first. That was a mistake. Later that day, I got an email from the HOA. Mr. Hall, your recent behavior toward board members constitutes harassment. Continued false accusations or tampering with HOA maintenance projects may result in legal action. I called Ramirez again, but he said the case was now under review. Translation. Gerald had pulled strings. I knew I couldn't rely on the system. So, I decided to handle it myself. That night, I grabbed a shovel, flashlight, and gloves. The trench was still soft from rain. I started digging where the footage showed them burying the bag. My heart pounded as I worked, every scrape of metal against dirt echoing in the silence. About 2 feet down, I hit something. Plastic. I brushed away the soil until I saw the edge of a black trash bag. My stomach knotted. I pulled it open. It wasn't a body. It was paperwork, stacks of documents, all stamped with the HOA's letterhead. Financial reports, contractor invoices, checks, all of them forged. Gerald and Linda had been siphoning money from community funds into fake companies they controlled. Landscaping, security systems, even road repairs, it was all fake billing. They hadn't been fixing the neighborhood. They'd been robbing it. I took everything inside, scanned it, and saved copies on multiple drives. Then I buried the evidence again just in case someone came looking. The next morning, I acted normal. I waved at Gerald as he drove by, pretending I didn't know a thing. But that night, I went one step further. I set up extra cameras, hidden ones this time, and aimed them all at the trench. I didn't have to wait long. Around 2 a.m., the cameras caught movement. A black SUV pulled up, Gerald's again. He and Kyle stepped out with flashlights and shovels. They started digging exactly where I had. I watched live from my phone as they unearthed the same bag I'd already emptied. They opened it, looked inside, and froze. Gerald started shouting, though I couldn't hear the words.
Kyle looked panicked.
They tossed the bag aside and started arguing. Then Gerald did something that made my blood run cold. He pointed directly at my house. He knew. The next morning, I found a new notice taped to my door. Final warning. You are in violation of HOA bylaws 3A, 3C, and 8F. Failure to comply may result in property seizure and community expulsion. Property seizure? That wasn't even legal. They were trying to scare me. But they didn't realize something. My cameras didn't just upload footage locally. They streamed automatically to a cloud server. I had everything, the digging, the bag, the argument, the threats. So I sent it Not to the police this time, but to every single homeowner in the community. I made an anonymous email account and shared the files, the footage, and a summary of the stolen funds. By afternoon, chaos erupted. My phone buzzed nonstop. Neighbors calling, texting, panicking. Some were angry, some disbelieving, but most were furious at the HOA. By evening, there was a crowd in front of Gerald's house, shouting, demanding answers. When the police arrived again, they weren't so friendly this time. With the entire neighborhood as witnesses and the footage plastered across every phone, Gerald couldn't charm his way out. The officers went straight to his garage and found boxes of missing HOA documents and unreported cash. Gerald, Linda, and Kyle were arrested that night. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Investigations confirmed everything I'd uncovered, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen over the years. The HOA was dissolved by court order, and Gerald was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and trespassing. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started showing up at my door to thank me. Some brought food, others offered to help fix my yard. I told them I hadn't done it for heroics. I just wanted peace. Still, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. One night, I reviewed my camera footage again, mostly out of habit. But then I noticed something. At exactly 3:12 a.m., one of the rear cameras flickered. A shadow moved across the frame, tall, slow, and deliberate. Then, for just a moment, I saw a face.
Kyle.
But he was supposed to be in jail. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The yard was empty. The trench had finally been filled. The grass receded. Nothing seemed out of place. But as I turned to go back inside, I saw it, a note, pinned to my fence. You think you won, but we're still watching. I froze. Then I checked the police updates the next morning. Kyle Matthews had made bail the night before. For the next few days, I stayed on edge. My cameras caught nothing unusual, but I kept my lights on, doors locked, and phone by my side. Neighbors said they saw a dark SUV circling the block at night. I started carrying pepper spray. Then one night there was a knock at the door. It was Linda. Her eyes were hollow, her hair unkempt. Please, she said, voice trembling. You don't understand. Gerald wasn't the only one. I hesitated. What do you mean? She looked over her shoulder nervously. The money, it wasn't just ours. The county council was involved. The trench, the fake projects, they were covering for something bigger. Gerald took the fall because he was expendable. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because they'll come for you next, she said. You embarrass them. They can't let that stand. Before I could say anything, she turned and ran back to her car. I never saw her again. 2 days later, her body was found in a hotel room outside town. Overdose, they said. But I knew better. The case officially closed a few weeks later. Gerald stayed in prison, Kyle disappeared after skipping bail, and the HOA was gone for good. Life slowly returned to normal. I fixed my yard, reseeded the grass, painted the mailbox, this time whatever color I wanted. The neighbors formed a new community association, one that actually worked together instead of ruling through fear. But every now and then, when I'm out in the yard late at night, I still hear it, the faint hum of machinery in the distance, the sound of digging. I installed new cameras, newer ones this time, with infrared. One night, out of curiosity, I reviewed the live feed from the backyard. There, in the far corner, where the trench once ran, the earth seemed disturbed. A faint line of soil, freshly turned.